Welcome to the Future of Supply Chain, presented by Dynamo. Each episode, we sit down with leaders in the industry as we build the future of supply chain together. Let's get into the show.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Future of the Supply Chain podcast. I'm your host, Madelyn O'Farrell, and we're grateful to be joined today by Robert Gaffney from Coca-Cola Bottling United. Robert, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we dive in, we'd love to just get a bit of background on Coca-Cola, particularly the entity or the sub-entity that you're with. Could you give us the 90-second overview?
Yeah. So I work for Coca-Cola Bottling Company United, which is a franchisee of the Coke system. So we are the second largest privately held bottler in the U.S. There's somewhere around 70 bottlers in the United States. And like I said, we're one of the larger kind of top five or so.
Perfect. And you had mentioned to me in a previous conversation that there's an entity that you work with as it relates to technology and innovation called Kona. Could you give our listeners a bit of insight on that end?
Yeah, absolutely. So Coke One North America, or Kona, is the IT shared services group that the largest 11 bottlers use to provide like our ERP, our planning tool for supply chain, and a variety of other applications to help run our DSD business. And within Kona, not only do we use it for kind of the standard applications, but we also have a group within Kona that helps innovate, new ideas and things like that. And that's one of the main places we go to help try new POCs and pilots and things like that.
Got it. That's really helpful context. And how about yourself? What's your story? How'd you get into this space?
Yeah, I started at United in 2012 as a warehouse analyst, and what our group was doing at the time was kind of some WMS light implementations. So we were going across our company and helping install warehouse scanning tools, or RF programs. And 2 years after I started, we started a massive M&A transition where the bottlers in North America got the opportunity to expand and add new territories and production centers. So from 2014 to 2018, I was part of a group that was adding all these locations and territories to our footprint. And since then, our company basically tripled in size, adding a total of 8 production centers. And I think we have 50 distribution centers. So the size of the company was massively increased.
That's fascinating. Thanks for that background. Especially given Coca-Cola Bottling's position within the supply chain as a shipper, I'd love to get your perspective on sort of the state of the union. Are there particular trends, challenges, opportunities that are top of mind for you these days?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what we're trying to do is figure out how to smooth out manual processes in our supply chain. We have a variety of different things that we have people assigned to work on, planners working on every single day, or analysts. So we're trying to find ways to automate more of those steps and make it easier for us to transact with ourselves and us to transact with other, shipper, carriers and things like that.
Absolutely. And we'll spend a lot of this conversation talking about those automation opportunities, and excited to dig in. But for our listeners' sake, I'd love to set the stage about the actual workflow. Here at Dynamo, we spend a lot of time thinking about workflows, how to optimize, automate, et cetera, across those pieces of the workflow. What does Coca-Cola bottling workflow look like? Are there particular pieces that stick out to you that are critical?
Yeah, so we are a DSD business, which is not the most common thing anymore. But every single day we take sales orders for our customers in our territory, like a Walmart or a Kroger. So we have a daily process of how we fulfill those orders in our local warehouses. That goes from sales order to the order being built, either running through a manual warehouse or an automated warehouse, and then the next morning ending up on a red truck, that being delivered in the market, and then that being settled, and that process just keeps going every single day. That's our regular DSD business. And then as far as supply chain goes, we have another process that, again, cycles every day, which is what we produce lands on the floor, and then we have we run our TM tool in BY to push loads out from our production centers to our distribution centers or to our bottler customers. So we have kind of a dual path that we're working on every day, fulfilling our DCs, our bottler customers, or our local customers. And like I said, it never stops.
No, absolutely makes sense. Um, I'm really curious to ask about AI and how you've thought about leveraging AI within your operations and workflows to date. Maybe one of the first questions on that front is just what kind of outcomes would you be looking for AI to achieve?
Yeah, I think, like I said, we do a lot of manual processes and we have a lot of different tools. So, any way we can cut down on that is a big thing. One of the things Kona is working on is a chat assistant. And the idea here is any one of our end users, like a warehouse supervisor or a supply planner, or even somebody, one of our sales partners, could log into the tool and say, what is my forecast on this SKU? When is the last time it was run? What is my source? What's my inventory? Instead of having a person have to log into Blue Yonder or into SAP or pull up Power BI or pull a Snowflake report, we don't even have to train these people on these tools. They can just use the chat assistant to answer a question pretty quickly, which a lot of what we do every day is answer these questions over email or try to educate and train people. And this will cut a lot of that work out, ideally, if it goes well.
And this is something that's being grown internally, is that correct? Or is there any external party that you're working with to achieve that?
Right now, this is a project that Kona is, hosting. That's the POC through them. But as you know, many different providers offer a tool like this, and that's part of the thought process here. Is because Kona is kind of our center pivot IT provider, trying to start with them being the initial host of it makes more sense to us rather than to go to an external provider like our data warehouse or one of our planning tools to have them do it. We want to start with Kona to see if we can work there and then potentially incorporate third parties into that process if it goes well.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And I'd be curious, in addition to this sort of employee enablement play that you've alluded to, are there particular cost centers that you would look to address with AI technology?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we kick around. I mean, I think within supply chain, our group of planners is kind of what we're looking at. We make it easier for them to do their process every single day, both from, what they do every day and also just the expectations of it. Right now, we ask a lot. They have to manage settings. They have to look at inventory and what's covered every week. We change our network so much. I think it would make sense if we can automate it. More than asking them to kind of be these firefighters every single day.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And how would you think about interfacing with AI technology from the perspective of those who would be using it within Coca-Cola, whether it's a broker, a warehouse, or some other entity within the supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as the other entity is open to participating with Kona, what that does is unlocks working with 10 other franchises other than Coke United, right? So for us, we're open to any and all input, right? But it has to work within our framework. So I think we're still trying to decide as a group what that answer is. But for me, I'm always open to any sort of participation.
Yeah, no, that's great. And taking a step back, I'd be curious what you view as some of the opportunity for AI within the supply chain. We've talked a little bit about Coca-Cola specifically, but from your perspective as a shipper in this space, what would you like to see it accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, if I look at the way a supply chain has all these different variables and opportunities for failure, there's got to be a way for AI to cover more than a person can cover, right? You can only solve so many problems, and AI has to have a way to help us predict some of those that we can't see. I mean, that's a lot of what we do every day is cover things that broke or fell through the network. And I think having people be that expected coverage point is kind of an antiquated view. So ideally in the future, AI could get ahead of that and just we never even talk about solving the problem.
No, that's interesting. One of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about is human in the loop as it relates to AI, right? Where you have these models that can handle various functions as an agent of sorts. And then you're dealing with these exceptions. And as we know, the supply chain is sort of riddled with exceptions. That's the job in many cases of a broker, as you pointed out, of what you spend your time doing. And then over time, if you have a human in the loop who is managing those exceptions, theoretically, it could train the model to where you could reduce the human need in the long run. So no, that's really interesting. We've talked about this a little bit about building a homegrown solution versus outsourcing it, or as you've talked about working with Kona. How do you think about that process when you would go outside of that Kona relationship? What an external third party would need to provide in order to win the business of Coca-Cola bottling?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is kind of the obvious one, which is cost, right? But that's part of what Kona's job is to do, is to decide, can they build it or should they buy it? It's not that Kona always has to build it themselves, but it's kind of a cost benefit of, can we do this for a reasonable cost basis for the bottlers to be interested in? Or are there other solutions that are better, farther along and better fleshed out than what Kona can do? And we've dealt with that in this innovation council a couple times, just to say, it just doesn't make sense for Kona to do this. We should go outside, or vice versa. So it really is a kind of a case by case basis.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And how would you think about buying an AI driven solution? What would be the kind of ROI that you would be looking for to make that decision?
That's a good question. I mean, to be honest with you, for the groups of the ideas that we've talked through so far, ROI has not been the primary focus. It's been, can this do what we want it to do? I mean, just my opinion from some of the ones the applications that I've seen, they've been kind of scratching the surface. So for me, I think it's more about, can it actually do what we would like it to do to even get to the point of talking about what the cost is? I'm more kind of open-ended on this, like really want to see what is possible versus having the really hard conversations about how expensive it is. Because I think eventually we will get there. It's not a question of if, it's when, but it's more about, does the application in question actually solve what we're looking for?
Yeah, no, that's certainly fair. Something we've heard elsewhere among stakeholders within the supply chain, such as in brokerage or forwarding, is that they can be wary of adding fixed costs to the P&L, particularly given the cyclicality of those businesses. Does that ring true for you as well as a shipper, or is there another framework that you would think about paying for external services as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cyclical nature of our business is more seasonal. We deal with the ebbs and flows within the calendar year, and that itself is kind of expected, which I think is a little different from the transportation market. Obviously, there's always larger macro concerns, for consumer spending and things like that we rely on, and that is a key part of Kona's funding. Is are we selling enough? So it's not that it's not something we think about, but for us, it's more within the 12 months what our business looks like. And we're trying to invest in the long term too. So it's not like we're going to make a different decision in March than we would in December. We're trying to decide for the future what capabilities we need to have to run our business.
And as a result of the cyclicality really being within the calendar year, do you find that there's a decent ability to forecast demand on a year-on-year basis? Are there any challenges to that? And I ask in part because if one was to add a fixed cost, a SaaS fee on the P&L, being able to forecast revenue accurately would probably be pretty useful. And so do you think that is a capability that's strong within Coca-Cola bottling and the broader shipping universe?
Yeah, I think in the Coke business, yes, for sure. I think that's less of a concern. I mean, we have a general idea of like what area or kind of what zone we'll be in as far as revenue. Obviously it changes, but I don't think it'll be drastic enough that you might not decide to invest in a tool. Like I said, it's more about, does it have a compelling value? If it has a compelling value, we can make different decisions on what to do with our IT investment dollars. It's more about, does it knock you off your feet? And then we might shift things around.
Yeah, no, that certainly makes sense. What would something knock you off your feet for? And I'm going to ask this in a very simple way. Is it revenue generation or is it cost cutting?
Well, since supply chain we don't really generate revenue in our business, at least for the Coke supply chain, I think it would be cost cutting. For us, we are a cost center to our business. Our sales partners, they're the ones that make the money, and we are the ones that we spend it. So it would be kind of a drastic reduction in how we can deliver our landed cost to our sales partners.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for that. Last question for me here. I would just love to hear what you think of as sort of the key barriers to adoption and deployment of AI, particularly from your perspective as a shipper in the space.
Yeah, I think we've dealt with this internally. We have people, that work for us that are scared of it. And I think spending the time to explain what we're trying to do, that we're trying to help cut down on manual work and make things easier and smooth out the rough spots of our supply chain, it takes time. And we've had to do that on some of our POCs, explain to people that we're not trying to take your job and we're not trying to do anything scary. We're not going to let it run our whole company. It really is talking to the end users and the different, business constituents of what we're trying to do, and alleviate some of those fears. And I think as we get into these, like the one or two POCs that we're talking about, I think it'll prove itself when we get into it, and that'll kind of alleviate some of that fear. But with that first POC we did, that was a lot of the time we had to spend was convincing people we're not trying to just tear everything apart. We're trying to make it better.
It's interesting you say that. We've heard that from other folks, broadly speaking, but also in this podcast season as well, that some of that human resistance is a barrier. And supply chain is sort of notoriously known as one of those industries that's resistant to technology, and AI, which is such a major step change in technological capability, is just sort of exacerbating that, or maybe highlighting it in an even, brighter way than previously done. Well, right. Robert, with that, thank you so much for joining us. That was all the questions I had. I appreciate you letting me pepper you with those. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We will have another episode coming up shortly with another member of the supply chain. Stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Follow us at dynamo.vc for all the latest episodes. We'll see you next time.